We've only had the briefest glimpse of her so far, but we are waiting to hear from Brittney Griner now that she's back on American soil. Here's our first look at the U.S. basketball star, unmistakable at 6 feet 9 inches tall, as she came off the plane just before 6 a.m. Eastern. Griner landed at Kelly Airfield in San Antonio, Texas, the final stop in a marathon journey home from a Russian penal colony. Her 10-month-long ordeal ending with a White House-approved prisoner swap. Hillary Johnstone has been following all of the breaking news on this for us this morning. Right now in Moscow, Hillary, Vladimir Putin is speaking after the Eurasian Economic Union Summit, and he's giving a news conference answering all sorts of questions on a variety of issues, but he commented on the prisoner swap. So this is new information this morning. What did Putin have to say about the exchange?
New information, Heather, and also leaving the door open here for possible future prisoner exchanges as well. So that is what Vladimir Putin has just said just a short time ago while speaking, saying that the two countries, so Russia and the U.S., that those intelligence services, that they remain in contact, saying that future prisoner swaps are possible. Of course, that is going to be good news for the family of Paul Whelan, another American who's currently in Russian detention. More on that in a little bit. But of course, we already know the outcome of that contact between those two countries' intelligence services. Of course, all of this culminating in the release of Brittney Griner, who is now back on U.S. soil. These are the images from Texas early this morning, landing shortly before 6 a.m. Eastern time. You can imagine that a lot of emotion going on there, a lot going through her head. Will be reunited with her wife, Sherelle, but she will also be making her way, it's expected, to a facility such as the Brooke Army Medical Center. This is a center where previous American detainees have been taken in the past. Not only will they be debriefed, but of course there's also the opportunity for a medical assessment. You can imagine that officials will have a lot of questions for Griner after she spent 10 months now in Russian detention, in Russian custody, because she was detained in those days right before the Russian invasion of Ukraine back in February. So these are some images from that Russian penal colony. It's about 500 kilometers southeast of Moscow. Of course, she was facing, or she had been sentenced to 9 years in prison after she was caught carrying hash oil through an airport. Now, we also have some incredible video from that prisoner swap, which led to her release. All of that playing out in Abu Dhabi on the tarmac of the airport there. But first, I'd also like to play a little bit of what we've heard from Griner. This was some video that was taken on an airplane. You can hear someone speaking to her in Russian and also explaining that she's now going to be going back to the U.S. She almost seems to be in disbelief. Here's a little bit of that.
Ну, вы знаете, куда вы летите?
Do you know where I'm heading to?
No.
No?
No. Вы летите домой.
You fly back home.
To the U.S.
To the U.S.
Да, конечно. Так что все будет нормально.
Everything will be fine.
The rest will be fine. That is what Brittney Griner was told there. Now, of course, all of this, and this is that moment when that prisoner exchange happened, all of this possible because of this moment. So you can see there Viktor Bout, the convicted Russian arms dealer, often called the Merchant of Death. He was exchanged for Brittney Griner. He's now back in Moscow. He's been reunited with his wife and with his mother, Heather. This is a little bit of footage of that moment as well playing out. But like we're saying, hearing from the Russian President Vladimir Putin this morning, saying that possibly more prisoner exchanges could happen.
Hearing from the White House in various American network shows this morning that Brittney Griner is in good spirits and seemingly in good health after arriving there in Texas, as you showed us, Hillary. As we say, we'll await to hear from her possibly at some point. Nothing officially on the schedule. But with all of the celebration around her return, there's also overshadowing that to a certain degree Paul Whelan's story, an American also detained in Russia for now very nearly 4 years, and his family members very disappointed that he is not back home on that plane today, too.
That's right. And of course, they want their loved one home. They've been saying, both his brother, Paul Whelan's brother and sister, that they're happy that Brittney Griner is back. But of course, they would like to see their brother back as well. Now, we've actually heard from Paul Whelan in this time since Brittney Griner's release was made public, speaking over the phone with a reporter. Here's a little bit of what we've heard from him.
I have to say I'm greatly disappointed that more has not been done to secure my release, especially as the 4-year anniversary of my arrest is coming up. I was arrested for a crime that never occurred. I'm happy that Brittney is going home today and that Trevor went home when he did. But I don't understand why I'm still sitting here. My bags are packed. I'm ready to go home. I just need an airplane to come and get me.
So referring there to Trevor, that would be Trevor Reed, another U.S. Marine who was in Russian custody, who was released earlier this year. Now, we've heard from both Joe Biden, the president, Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, on all of this, saying that they wish 2 Americans were coming home today, but that they do remain committed to trying to secure Paul Whelan's release as well, Heather.
Hillary Johnstone, thank you for the coverage this morning. Bill Richardson is the former governor of New Mexico and the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Right now, he heads an organization aimed at freeing Americans abroad, and he was directly involved in the early negotiations to secure Brittney Griner's release. I spoke to Governor Richardson last hour on the program. He's in Santa Fe, New Mexico this morning, and we began the conversation talking about that moment and those visuals of Brittney Griner getting off the plane, what he felt as he saw her arrive safely.
It was a great thrill. It was satisfaction. I will say I was on the edges of the negotiation. The credit has to go to the U.S. government, to the National Security Council. But seeing Brittney leave and go to San Antonio, where she'll get some medical relief, was very positive. I was sad that Paul Whelan was not part of this. I've been for 4 years trying to find formulas to get Paul back, but it always seems at the very end there's a roadblock. I thought there would be a 2-for-2 exchange, Paul Whelan and Brittney for Bout, the Russian arms dealer, and somebody else. But at the last minute, I think President Putin decided, no, it's going to be 1-for-1 or nothing. And I think President Biden made the right choice to get Brittney home. But now we focus on getting Paul Whelan home. And there are other Americans there that we're trying to get. And by the way, my organization also is involved in international relief efforts, hostage efforts. I know there are Canadians in many parts of the world that are detained that are a priority and should be a priority for any government.
Okay, you have raised so many things that I'd like to spend a couple of moments exploring individually some of the aspects. Let's just talk about Brittney Griner for a moment, because, yes, I remember initially you were very involved, and then the State Department indicated it wanted more of a state-to-state negotiation to secure Brittney Griner's release. So perhaps a shifting role there. But are you in any position to talk about or to let us be in any of those rooms for any of the discussions to help us understand how they went?
Well, what I did, Heather, was I made 2 trips to Russia. I talked to Russian officials, to Putin assistants, people that I'd served with in my previous role in government. I talked to the White House extensively, but the channel that was negotiating was an official channel installed by the White House and the Kremlin. But eventually in Russia, every decision is made by Putin. And in the United States, if you're going to have a prisoner exchange, it involves basically a pardon, and that was for Bout. It involves the President of the United States. So,
right.
You know, these are very solitary decisions. It's like there are a lot of people in the room, but they change daily. It depends. And the relationship between Russia and the U.S. is so bad that I think that affected the final negotiations, preventing Paul from being part of the deal that brought Brittney home.
Even as recent as July, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, was indicating that he, too, indicating publicly even that he thought it would be at least a 2-for-1 exchange with both Brittney Grimes and Paul Whelan. And what we've heard since in the last 24 hours is that he seems to be considered in a different category because his charges involve espionage. I mean, why do you think that he is not back today? What is it about him particularly, or the allegations against him, that have prevented that?
Well, on the positive side, the fact that we've gotten Trevor Reed, an American Marine, about 4 months ago, and now Brittney, now there's the third, indicates that the Russians are ready to negotiate despite the bad relationship. Now, what do I think happened at the end? I think that President Putin didn't want to give President Biden a victory, the 2 for 2, so he said just one. And that's what I think happened. I think Biden or Putin at the end overruled his advisors, saying, no, it's just going to be one-on-one, because it looked for a while, and I was involved and I heard from Russians, it'd be 2 for 2. And that's what we thought was going to happen, but it didn't. These things change rapidly, and you got to adjust. But I do think that Whelan, we can get him out. I think the government, working with outside groups like myself, and by the way, I don't work for the government, so they don't tell me what to do, but we coordinate with them.
You work on behalf of the families, correct, sir? You work on behalf of the families?
We work only for the families.
Right.
Well,
so
no,
are you actively involved in the Paul Whelan case now?
Yes. Oh, yes, of course. I've been involved with that for 4 years, proposing options for in the Trump administration, also in the Biden administration. How can we get him out? Now, he's a priority. The guy is a class guy, wrongfully detained 4 years, dubious charges, espionage, no. And he's been gracious. His family's very gracious. I feel even a little guilty that he's not coming home, but we will get him home. It's not the end of the road. The Russians are negotiating, and yeah, they're hard line at the end. They're tough negotiators, but I think it'll happen. And he's an American military Marine. He's not as glamorous as Brittney Griner, but he doesn't deserve to be there for 4 years.
A couple more questions. This is so fascinating to take us into what has been happening. When you say relations between the U.S. and Russia are poor, one of the things that I've been hearing and reading about why Vladimir Putin decided what he did was perhaps to distract away from what's going on in the war in Ukraine and how poorly Russia is faring in the war in Ukraine. Do you think there's any merit to that, any credence to that as part of his motivation at this point?
Well, getting Bout released, the Russian, for him, for Putin, is a plus. It's a political plus. He's bringing a prominent Russian back. So at a time when his domestic support because of the war may be weakening, it's a good move for him.
Okay.
So what I think he was thinking was, I don't want to do this for President Biden. The relationship gets worse over Ukraine. We have no arms control agreement. And so that affects the leader of Russia, and President Biden, I think, got the edge in this agreement with Brittney Griner, because she's an icon and she's won 2 gold medals and has a great family. By the way, she had a great support team.
Yes.
Social media, basketball. A lot of Americans knew about this case.
Can I just ask you, as I have to let you go for other interviews elsewhere, but in terms of precedent, there has been some discussion about whether this move and this swap makes it more dangerous for Americans elsewhere. You know this field so intimately, that other governments, other countries might seek to detain Americans in order to secure a prisoner swap for their own prisoners. And therefore, it's perhaps a dangerous thing that has been done here. What do you think of that argument?
Well, I don't think much of that argument because there's no data to support the fact that if a country takes Americans, they're using them as bargaining chips. About a year ago, I got a journalist, Danny Fenster, out of Burma, and we got him just as a humanitarian gesture. There was no American, there was no trade-off. So it depends on the situation. Now, what every government should do, and I'm not telling Canada what to do, is we should put a maximum effort, the government, to secure American hostages out. Now, it's going to be unpleasant sometimes to get a guy like Bout out, who's a bad guy, an arms dealer, who was involved in killing Americans. But otherwise, how are we going to get Brittney out or Paul Whelan out? Or we had some in Venezuela recently that involved prisoner exchanges. We have 5 Americans in Iran. that we need to get out. You've had Canadians also that involved trade-offs and hostages with unpleasant countries and outcomes, but we cannot turn our back on our hostages anywhere. We, Western world, Canada, the United States, the European Union, nobody should.
Bill Richardson, former governor of New Mexico, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and involved chiefly in the early stages, but now very involved in negotiating the release of detained Americans internationally. He's in Santa Fe this morning.